Hello, everyone. Welcome to Chai Chat and Community. It is your boy Krushnadevsinh back again. And today I just want to hold a conversation with a bunch of brown people and seeing it where it goes. But before we kick off, I like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which are all coming in from. I'm currently zooming in from Wadawurrung and Boonwurrung lands. And I'd like to acknowledge, traditional owners, the elders past, present, and emerging. I also like to acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I also like to acknowledge that we're living in a crazy world right now. There's a pandemic going on, these crazy situations going on all around the world, and hopes and prayers are with you. We hope you're going well, and thank you so much for joining us for the hour. And hopefully, we can entertain you a little bit. I hope you find new things about yourself and about our community. I guess today we're going to be talking about what is your brown identity. And one of the reasons when I was, when the owner came to me, she's like, "Oh, can you do a bit of a show?" I'm like, "Oh, what do I want to show on?" I'm like, So I thought, when I was growing up, I had this issue of not being proud of my culture. I'm obviously Indian, and I wasn't very proud of, bringing curry to school or, speaking Gujarati, my native tongue at school. So I'm like, that's an issue that could be going on for other people, other brown people, whether that's international students, whether that's local students. And I want to see what the parents' perspective would be of someone who's a mental health professional, see the impacts of it. And now I'm at a stage where I accept the fact, I'm Indian, I have brown skin, I have a bit of an accent, and there's nothing okay with that. So I want to bring forward a few other people from the community who talk about these things. And I guess I want to highlight the difference in the brown community. Like, we have this term, we're all brown people, but there's so much diversity in us. I think that is 1 in 4 people in the world are from a brown background. So I'm like, we're not all the same. We're going to be very different. So let's highlight that. Let's celebrate that and come to an conversation where we can, respect that, learn from each other. And that's why I have these 4 beautiful guests today, which I'm going to get you to introduce them. So anyone want to kick off first?
I'll go first. Okay.
Thank you.
Go for it, Anushka. Okay, so hi, my name's Anushka. I am a generalist psychologist. I run Umid Psychology. I also work at a high school full-time, and I'm also the co-founder for the Shore Project podcast, which is a podcast that focuses primarily around migrant issues and how to overcome them. So for international students, for migrants who are moving here, for people who have moved here in past years, all of that.
Perfect. Thank you. Krisha, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. My name is Krisha. My preferred pronouns are she and her. I'm 21 years old and I'm currently in my final year of my undergraduate degree. Yes. I'm pursuing my bachelor's in biomedical sciences at Monash Uni. When I'm not excessively studying, I do enjoy a bit of volunteering. I am currently an emergency services responder at Red Cross, and I work as a sales consultant in marketing.
Perfect. Thank you. Tahira, would you like to go next?
Sure. Hi, my name is Tahira. So I'm a mother of 2 young people, and I'm a community worker as well as a life coach. I enjoy gardening, cooking, entertaining people, which is not happening because of lockdown, but I like spending time with my family and friends.
Perfect. Hopefully you can entertain us a little bit today. Udit, would you like to go next?
Sure. So my name's Udit. I probably don't do as many cool things as some of the other people here, but I'm a Year 12 student at Brentwood Secondary College. So that's about all I do, kind of just studying at the moment. But I do love playing guitar. I've played guitar for like 9 years now. But that's me.
I think playing guitar is pretty cool, and I think you being a Year 12 student is so much valuable. And thank you for making the time. I know you guys have exams and there's lockdowns in place, so thank you for coming along. I might kick it off. I guess one of the things I want to ask you is, what is your current cultural identity? And I use the word current on purpose because I feel like identity, you can't be fixed with an identity. It's something that it's evolving, whether you move countries, whether you acquire new knowledge. So I guess I want to ask you, what is your current cultural identity? Anyone want to start off?
I'm happy to start this one off.
Mm-hmm.
I find I like how you use the word current cultural identity, and I agree with you that yes, it does change with your environment and the circumstances you are in. I would look at myself and identify myself as a Punjabi Muslim as my cultural identity. But again, I will be looking at my legal identity as an Australian Kenyan. So if I was to identify myself, it's quite a mouthful. It goes up Australian Kenyan Punjabi Muslim. But that's because of all the cultural backgrounds that we're looking at. So that would be my cultural identity would be Australian Kenyan Punjabi Muslim.
I might ask you a follow-up question. Has that changed for you during, I guess, your transition or anything?
It has changed over time. Yes, it has, because way back when we were in Kenya, we'd only identify ourselves as Punjabi Muslims, because there wasn't a question about where you're from. You're in the country, so you are perceived Kenyan. So you'd only identify as a Punjabi Muslim. Whereas when we moved from there to Australia, we've got to identify ourselves from where we come from. So we're Australians, but we're from Kenya. So we become Australian Kenyan Punjabi Muslims.
Wow, that's fascinating that the shift from countries changes, easier to change your identity and sort of change the word of now it's more where you're from. I might throw to Krisha, because who is an international student, and I think, would you like, what is your current cultural identity, and if the transition from another country has yours changed or not?
Well, I like to think of my cultural identity as a mosaic. There's several different facets to it, and what in my experience as an international student, what I've noticed is it's very context dependent. Certain conversations make certain identities more salient, more obvious. So kind of like what Tahira said, in Australia, she has to say that she's Kenyan Punjabi Muslim. Am I right? Australian.
Right.
Similarly for me, I have to make that sort of obvious gesture that I am Malawian, Indian, Australian. But then if I'm back in Malawi, it's like, okay, I'm Indian. But then if I'm in India, it's like, I'm from Gujarat. So I think it's very, very context dependent. But if you were to ask me what my generic sort of cultural identity would be, then I would definitely identify as Malawian Indian.
Yeah, and I think I love the word that you said. It's very contextual, because I think it's very true depending on the situation that's asked, and even what stage of life you're in and where you're in. I think that's very well put. I haven't thought of it from that perspective, and I guess this is the conversations that I want to be having. I might go over to Udit now, because you have an interesting story as well. I guess I want to ask you, what's your current cultural identity, and how did you come to that?
So I'd say my current cultural identity would be an Australian Indian. So I was born in Chandigarh in 2003, but I moved to Australia in 2004. So I don't really have that like traditional sort of immigrant story where, like a lot of people, they would come here like at that age where they sort of remember moving. Whereas, I've done most of my growing up here. So, when people ask me like where I'm from, I obviously say, I'm from India, but I feel like I've still got a lot of like elements of that Australian identity, having grown up here, and, all my friends like are Australian, and, like I don't have, and like my parents, they didn't raise me with that traditional Indian, they didn't bring me up like that, and they never forced me to do anything like that. So, yeah, I feel like so I'd say, I'm an Indian Australian, but, like my heart, like I'm probably more Australian, like with that Western.
Fair enough. Yeah. And I guess. Thank you for going to that. And I think it's interesting that you were one when you moved here. So it puts you in an interesting phase, and I think it goes back to contextual. You were technically born in India, but then you do a majority of your growing up here. Did you go back often to India, or?
Okay, so no, I haven't. Like I've gone back. I've visited 3 times in my life, so I wouldn't call that often. And I guess COVID sort of put a bit of spanner in the works in terms of not being able to go back. But I've only gone back 3 times, so I'm pretty disconnected from like my extended family, seeing as all my extended family are in India. So I haven't gone back since, I think the last time I went back was 2017, so it's been quite a while.
Wow, and now hopefully COVID situation improves. But it's good to know that you've been back a few times, but there's still that you still feel that bit of disconnect. And we might touch on that a bit later on if you want to, I guess, explore that side of your identity more. We might go to Anushka now. I guess I want to ask you, what is your cultural identity?
Currently, I identify as a third culture kid. I'm going to get to what that means in a second. Cultural identity is a huge factor for me because it's something that I did a lot of research around last year as part of my master's research project. Personally, I'm born in New Zealand. I'm Fijian Indian, but I grew up here in Australia. So there's a whole mix in that bag. My mum's side of the family, because we're from Fiji, everyone's from different parts of India. So my mum's side is from Rajasthan and from Punjab. So we do a lot of Rajasthani things. We do a lot of Punjabi things. But my dad's side is from UP. And so there's like everything is in the mix there. And it was a mouthful trying to explain that to people growing up as well. Like, oh, where are you from? Well, I'm a New Zealand born Fijian Indian. And they're like, oh, so you're like Fijian. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm Indian. But like, what's your cultural heritage? And I'm like, oh, it just means so many different things, right? And up till like 2 years ago, I wasn't an Australian citizen. So I didn't classify, even though I grew up here, I didn't classify myself as an Australian. So I guess I've got Australian in the mix there too. And I'm still a dual citizen of New Zealand and Australia, very heavily support New Zealand in all sporting events. True to my home. But someone recently pointed out to me that when I refer to home, I refer to Fiji. And you asked a question earlier to Udit about whether if you go back to India often. When I was growing up, we spent a lot of time going back to Fiji because my grandparents lived there. So, and it wasn't like, 1 or 2 weeks at a time. Sometimes it'd be 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. And like, you essentially grow up in sporadically and you gain a little bit from every place that you've been. So now what's happened is as I've gotten older and I've started doing research in this area as a mental health professional and as a psychologist, I've come to realize that there's a term for this. Like when you come from different places, when your parents have a different home culture to you, when you live in a different culture, it's called being a third culture kid. And I think this is a wonderful term for anyone who is struggling with biculturalism and who comes from so many different places, because it really, and like if you go into my Instagram page, I've got like a little bit of a Venn diagram, but it kind of looks at like your home culture, the culture that you've been brought up in, and your parents' culture, and how all of those things like overlap and then build the value system that you have. So that's me. That's where I'm from.
Wow, perfect. Thank you so much for going into detail, and I guess about the third culture kid. And it's so good to see. I think we have a comment from Asif who said, "I think I will have my identity as Punjabi wherever I go. Can't say Indian or Pakistani. That would be nationality where I was born." And I guess that's so. I think that's one of the interesting things about identity, that I asked all of you guys in one question, but all of you had different explanations, different words that you used, and different ways of the way you arrive at your identity. And I think that's the cool thing about having these conversations, that yes, we're all technically brown, but even in that, there's so much diversity, and even like more than the diversity, we come from different parts of the world. It's so cool to see that we can hear from all of you.
Connor, actually, I have a question for you. Like in terms of like, because we call ourselves like a brown community, right? And I was recently talking to a colleague of mine about this, and he's like, you guys call yourselves brown. And he's like, why do you do that? And I'm like, because we come from so many different places that sometimes just saying that you're Indian is not enough, or just saying that you're Pakistani is not enough, or just saying that you're from a specific place is not enough. Like this is how we identify. And I thought that was like a really interesting question to come from someone, because they're like, isn't that a little bit racist? And I was like, I don't think so. Like that's just what I grew up with. Like it's always been called the brown community because there is so much diversity, and I think people don't recognize that sometimes.
I think 100%. And I think Mufis just said it, and I totally resonate with being a TAC, which stands also for third culture kid. I feel like I like to use the word the brown community because we're taking ownership of the word. Sometimes because of our skin, we do get separated, or we do get put in a box. But I'm saying, yes, I am brown. I'm going to accept it. What are you going to do about it? It's like, exactly. I'm owning it now. You can't really do anything. It's not something that you can make fun of me because I'm owning it. And I think Swati just put in a question. Do you feel like you're often forced to prove your identity in the Australian context? I guess I want to also add that in with another question is, what's been your experience of growing up or living in a country that's different to the one you were born in or your parents were born in? So we might go to Tahira now. I guess, what's been your experience of growing up in a different culture to the one you were born in, if you've been ever forced to prove your Australian identity?
Thanks so much for that, Kanu. And Anushka, I so resonate with what you said, because I feel like, well, I shouldn't call myself a kid, but I feel like a third culture, because
adult.
like third culture adult. Yeah, because that happens a lot. And having grown up in different, in a culture or a different community that's diverse or different from the community so I grew up in Kenya, which was, we had a very a separate community. So we everyone had their own communities in Kenya. We had a Punjabi community, we had a Gujarati community, we had all these different communities that we would integrate, but then we would also be in our own communities. And then from there we went on to other places and countries where we were trying to assimilate into the cultures and the communities that are around us. And I think we're in a journey, and we're trying to integrate into this new community that we've moved into now. So growing up, I have had good experiences, as in I've met some ways and some cultures and values that I resonate with or I accept, and I've had the opportunity of seeing the friendly side of the communities that I've been in. But also I've noticed the different in other areas. For example, in law enforcement, I've noticed differences in countries that I've grown up in and countries where I've lived. Back in countries in Kenya, it's not as strong as you would see law enforcement in, say, UAE, where I've spent time in, or in Australia, where we currently are. So there's been those differences, and also in terms of respect and gender roles across the different communities that we've grown up. There's this classism that goes on in some cultures and communities, and there's society that really structures those classes for you. So you kind of integrate into those classes without knowing. So that would be my experience in these different cultures and communities.
Wow. And thank you so much for sharing. You do have a wealth of experience by living in different cultures, different communities, and it's interesting that you put in how there's different rules and norms for every different culture, and you sort of sometimes you fit yourself, and because of the lands you live on, you sometimes, as you fit yourself in them, you have no choice. But you can, I guess, move into Australia, it's a bit more liberal. You can sort of pick and choose what parts of the culture you want to take. And Mehek's just put in, who is Tahira's daughter. I love being able to identify as a third culture kid or adult. It gives me so much meaning as a teenager, and as my identity evolves. I mean, I love that fact you said it evolves, because it's never it's never changing. It's never the one. So I might go to Krishna now, because you are an international student. I guess, how is it living in Australia, first of all, and also because you do come from an Indian background, but you grew up in Malawi. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question. It was really actually interesting listening to Tara and how she was describing Kenya, because I feel like, there's obviously, like, from the time she was there and from when I was born and raised over there, not much has changed. We talk about things changing from one generation to other, but obviously there's some things like social hierarchies that are just passed down from generation to generation. And being different sometimes is difficult in that sense, because it's very hard to sort of dismantle a dominant system. And that's why we have to sort of, suppress our identity to assimilate into that dominant system, because if you try going against it, you're an outsider. In terms of coming to Australia, the first thing I experienced was a massive culture shock. I have never seen people this laid back in my life. And, coming from an Indian background where, like, you refer to everyone with G or auntie or uncle, and then going to a white friend's house and having to call their mom Rachel. Yeah. I couldn't, like, my mom would absolutely not take that. Or even something as simple as going to my friend's house and then taking my shoes outside before I enter their house, and they just look at me really weirdly, like, there's something wrong with your feet. So massive culture shock, but then, I really appreciated it because it opened my eyes to all of these different things that are there. And it gave me the chance to introspect on my own values that I derive from my culture. And like you said, there's bits of it that you're going to take and improve your own self-culture, your own third culture. But then there's also some parts you're like, I think I'll hold on to this. The cons obviously are, you feel isolated from both cultures. I felt isolated from my Malayan culture, from my Indian culture, and also Australian culture, because whatever dominant culture I was a part of, like when I moved to Australia, Australian culture is dominant. So the dominant culture sees me as a try hard for trying to fit in. But then my culture from back home, like if I was talking to someone from India, they're like, oh, your accent's changed. You're becoming a Gori now. And I don't know how to deal with that because I'm not rejecting my Indian heritage or my Malayan heritage, but then I'm sort of obligated to go with the dominant Australian culture if I expect myself to progress here and be accepted, which I think everyone would want regardless of what culture you're in. So it's been really interesting. I absolutely really love having moved to Australia to be able because it's really just opened my mind up to all the things that are there in the world.
Wow, perfect. Thank you so much for sharing, Krisha. And it's interesting that moving to, I guess, all these little experiences that you're having about leaving the shoes outside or calling white parents by their actual name, which is still a little, it makes you think, oh, do I call them Bob? But I think that is great.
Does anyone feel physically like it uncomfortable when like that happens? Because I had this exact same experience growing up. Go over to your like white friend's house and they're like, oh, just call me Mary. Take your shoes, like walk inside the house with your shoes on. And I'm like, I don't know how to do any of those things. What are you asking me for? What do you mean?
I find weird as well, especially if it's someone younger, much younger to me, calling me my name. I do feel a bit. I'd rather you call me auntie because that's what I feel, or call me Meg's mom. I'm happy with that. But call me my name. I just feel a bit. It's a bit awkward, and same for myself. To anyone elder to me, calling them by their name, I feel it's just the way. I think it's the way we've been brought up. We've been brought up in. It's a form of respect. That's what we've been taught. So I get it.
Nah, I think that's a very good point. And I want to. We'll answer this question first. Loving the show. How can we? Thank you so much, Oz. How can we fill the gap between our communities, especially between those who were born in the West compared to those who have recently migrated or international students, workers? Thoughts on brown Australians hating on their FOB cousins? I might throw it over to Udit actually, because I think you have a very interesting perspective. Being very young, growing up predominantly in Australia, have you ever thought of you're very fresh off? FOB means, by the way, fresh off the boat, or very recent arrival to this country. What do you think of that, Udit?
I mean, I don't because the thing is, I don't really see myself as an outsider necessarily, because I feel like I've also been accepted as an Australian. I feel like I don't have much of an accent. I feel like I've been accustomed to Australian values and culture. I think I'm probably the only one here who actually wears shoes inside the house. I don't who's on the outside, but I don't I've never really felt like an outsider, but I do think that I've been raised a little bit with some Indian values instilled in me, and one of them is being the expectation. Because I feel like me personally, my parents have put such high expectations on me, and especially as a student, academically, it was never really acceptable to get below 90% in school. Whereas some of my friends, they'll get an 80 and they'll celebrate, a 60, they'll celebrate, and they'll text their mum, be like, Mum, I got 60% on this test, and they're like, let's celebrate when you get home. Whereas me, it's preparing for that, liberation that's gonna come when you get home. But so I've never really felt like a FOB or an outsider, because I feel like since I've grown up here and I've I've been so accustomed to Australian values that when I do go back to India, I feel like more of an outsider.
And I guess I want to throw back another question. Do you wish, or would you like to change that you feel like an answer going to India, for example, where your parents grew up, or what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, yeah, I definitely think that's probably not like great, like seeing all my cousins and stuff, and then like the way they interact with each other. They're also like pretty close, and seeing, I never get to see them. I've seen them 3 times, collectively in my life. So, I probably would like to change that. And I feel like, being able to go back would help a lot. But in the circumstances we are in now, it's not really possible.
Perfect. Thank you, Udit. And I guess I want to follow up on Oz's questions of how can we fill the gap between, I guess, newly arrived and people who've been, I guess, been here for a while. So I might throw to Krisha, because, you being an international student, have you seen a difference between the way you're treated as an international student compared to by, I guess, other brown Australians who've been here for years?
I guess every migrant's experience of their sort of host country and originating country will be different. Particularly for me, I did see, like, when I first arrived in Australia, I did find myself finding the Indians first. And that's because it just attaches a sense of belonging that, you're in an unknown place. You want to find people you can relate to first. And there were a lot of people like yourself, Kano, that you're, first gen here in Australia, and you know what it's like to be here, but I'm fresh off the boat. So I think it was really nice to sort of have this community where there was a mix of, Indians who were raised here, or like brown people who were fresh off the boat like me. It was just nice to have all these different people around me and have an open conversation with them, feel comfortable to ask questions, hold a safe space for us to, ask about our doubts. Because if you have that growth mindset in an open conversation, no one feels fresh off the boat. No one feels like they don't belong if they're not Indian enough. So it was really nice to sort of have this mixture of community that I could hold as a reference point, and always ask if there's something going wrong. So definitely massive heads up to any international student that I come across would be, here's a group of people that I met. They're amazing, and they're like raised here. You should totally talk to them. You should come for our events. You can have so much fun. So it's really nice to have access to those resources.
No, and I think, thank you for touching on that. I think there's a great point that you've made, that even if you're newly arrived or you've been here years, you shouldn't feel like you're not accepted here. Everyone's we're in the same lands. We're all accepted, we're all respected the same. We might go to Jagesh's question. Is there any parts of your identity you wish you didn't have to hide? Sometimes I feel there's a South Asian culture, but then there's some culture like Ugandan or Gujarati South Asian. I might throw to you guys. Has there been any experiences where you've had to hide your identity? Because I can personally say, when I was in school, I would tell my mum, do not give me any curry food. Give me a Nutella sandwich. I don't want curry. I don't want roti. I don't want, dal chawal or anything. Just give me Nutella and bread and I'll be happy. So that's something that when I was young in school, I'm like, no. People are going to say it smells, or I have to use my hands to eat. And I just give me like a sandwich so I can cook. Yeah. So I guess I'm going to throw to you guys.
Yeah.
I have a similar experience I can share, Kanu. It wasn't me, it was my elder sister many, many years ago. And we used to go to the same school, but she was in a higher class. And my grandma made paranthas for us for lunch. And they were, we had aloo paranthas, the potato ones, and we had muli paranthas, the reddish ones. And my sister liked the muli paranthas, so she took muli paranthas to school and we got aloo paranthas. So come lunch, and she had to throw her parantha out before lunch because it was smelling in the class, because it was a muli parantha, and we had to share our lunch with her because she didn't even own it. She didn't even let anyone know whose food was smelling in the class. So that's something that's happened with my sister in her school when we were much younger. So food has been a big thing about your identity. And then we never took paranthas to school after that. Even aloo paranthas we didn't. We told my granny never give us paranthas again.
It's interesting that even back then it was still very, the food and the smell was still very I guess at the forefront of growing up. Anushka, did you have anything to add?
Yeah,
to
I was
that?
going to say that I went to 2 different high schools, and my second high school was a little bit more multicultural in the sense of my group. And I found that when you have a more multicultural group, so there were like a lot of different people from different backgrounds, so Italians, like Chinese, Korean, Sri Lankan. I was like the token Indian person because it was like it was a very white school. But because our group was so multicultural, it just made bringing food to school so much easier. Like I used to take roti and like sabzi inside roti to school, and I felt comfortable with it because my friends would be bringing in like their little bento boxes, and we'd open up our lunches together and we'd be like, yeah, this is great. But at my first high school, that was, not that I was ever like worried about it or concerned about it, but I think the lunches back then were a little bit more inclined towards the Western side of things. And it's an interesting sort of, I love that food's in one of those experiences that people have. Also, like I've noticed with some of my friends, like going from school to then like becoming comfortable in their workplace, having like Indian food or like curries and stuff, and thinking, damn, like why was I so concerned about this and what other people were thinking when I was in high school? But you do get made fun of. Yeah.
I'd like to add something to that. It's just sort of hit me in my brain right now. Anushka mentioned, how you become comfortable with bringing your cultural meals to work. One of the units I'm doing at university right now talks about how to make workplaces more intercultural. And what I've noticed is when I used to take dal chawal to school, obviously I feel really nervous opening the tiffin. It's just pungent everywhere.
Very strong smell.
Can't avoid it. But then when I took dal chawal to work and I opened it and the aroma is spreading everywhere, someone's head perks up and says, "Oh my God, that smells delicious."
Yeah.
And so when I thought about that experience, what I sort of took away from that is that the essence of it lies in validation.
Yeah.
When we're taking the dabba to school, the validation you're getting is negative because no one is sort of able to understand the sort of deeper cultural dimension to a surface dimension like food. But then when you take it to work, you're sort of in that maturity or that stage in your life where you understand that for something to smell that good, a lot of effort, a lot of love, a lot of technique has gone into it, and that's positive validation. So I think as a child, or even when I was in school, if someone would have told me, "Oh, your food smells amazing," I don't think I would have been as nervous opening that dabba and having my dal chawal and actually offering like, "Oh, why don't you try it? I made it myself." So I feel a lot of it stems from the validation we receive from everyone around us, and sometimes it's difficult because when you're in a minority culture and you have something that represents a minority culture, it's not going to be easy for them to understand. And in a place like high school, when we're still sort of developing identities, especially cultural identities, it's very easy for the dominant culture, which is normal and acceptable, to sort of squash that minority culture popping through in like maybe a headdress or maybe a lunch meal. So validation is a big thing when it comes to something like that.
Can I just add to this in terms of the connectedness to culture that you were speaking about? Food is a really great example of one way that we connect to culture. I mean, there's so many other ways as well. Sometimes it's the way that we dress. Sometimes it's the events that we partake in. Sometimes it's the languages that we speak, et cetera, or, but all of this connected to likeness to culture, sometimes if they're invalidated at a young age, what you'll find, and this is what I'm finding in some of my clients right now, is that they do tend to the tendency to move away from your culture if you've had a negative experience happens at a young age. So when you are developing that like cultural identity, you like, oh, especially if you're growing up here, like, in a Western culture, like a Western country, and it's so different. You're just like, oh, I'm going to shift away from this and I'm going to move towards something else. And what I found is like some of my older clients who have experienced this stuff when they were younger, maybe in high school, or, even like, early days uni, they've come back and been like, oh, like I want to like connect to my culture now. and I want this to be, I want to develop some form of something. But because I was teased about this thing when I was younger, I shifted away from it. But I didn't just shift away from food. I shifted away from the way that I pronounce my name. I shifted away from the way that I, from speaking the language. I've shifted away from the other things that build up culture, even though I held on to some of the other values, like academic achievement and filial piety. So it's really interesting to see how like one or two people's validation when you're younger, especially in the cultural context, can end up impacting you in a lifelong sort of way. And then again, how you connect to your community as you get older, because if you're shifting away from that cultural connectedness when you're young and not establishing that, it becomes a little bit more difficult to connect with all of that as you get older. And we're a very collectivistic like community as South Asians.
That definitely resonates.
Thank you so much for that. Oh, sorry, Udit. Yeah, you go, bro.
I like listening to that because like I've kind of definitely like moved away from like my like connectedness to my culture, and I was like thinking about it, and so the first time I took like ethnic food to school, it was like my mum made this wrap out of like roti with some sabzi in it, and it was in prep, and I remember I was eating it, and then some of the sabzi fell out onto the table, and some kids screamed out, "Oh, he's eating food!" So like that was my first and only experience, and like till now I still like I've never taken any Indian food to school, and like even at home like I don't like if I can avoid eating it I do, and you were saying like with the pronunciation of your name, like the proper pronunciation of my name is like Udit, but I still like even at home it's Udit, like it's always Udit for me,
Yeah.
And name is
I think sorry.
Sorry,
No, you go too, yeah.
the name is a very tricky one because we all have beautiful names and we want to be pronouncing them, but not everyone is. And sometimes you struggle to ensure that your name is pronounced correctly. And
that's it.
For my own experience, when we did move to Australia, I could hear from experiences of others that your name will never be pronounced firstly, and secondly, you'll be discriminated upon your name. So when you're sending out applications and resumes, don't write your name. So I was guilty of trying to change my name so it would sound more Australian for
Auntie, what's your white name?
I was changing my name to Tyra, Tyra.
Tyra. Does anyone else have an Australian name? I'm curious about this. I'm very curious.
But I realized it, and I said, look, I'm going to go with my name, and you're going to pronounce it. And if you can't, if I get my job, I'll get it on my name and not on the name of someone I don't know. So name is it's very interesting. I'd like to also know if anyone else did that.
Yeah, did anyone have any similar experiences?
I have friends who do this till this day. They'll have like pretty easy pronounceable South Asian names. And I'll go like, you go to the coffee shop to get coffee, and I will always be like Anushka, and they'll be like, sorry, what? And I'm like, I'll spell it out for them from start to end and be like, it's not a hard name. Come on, you can pronounce it. It's basically like babushka, right? Let's go with it. And I'll have friends that'll go up and be like, oh, my name's like Steve, my name's Hannah. And I'm like, how is this? Like, you can pronounce other names, just tell them. Like, they will make and I feel like people are making the effort in society now to go along and, put their effort into learning other people's names. My brother has a longer name than me. His name is Ashutosh. When he was born, my mum checked with the midwives to be like, how can you pronounce it? Like, is it, easy to pronounce? They were like, yeah, it's like Macintosh. But even for him, like at school, everyone shortens it down. It's Ash. And so when you say his name out loud, everyone's like, oh, who's that? And I'm like, no, that's his name. That is his full name.
And I guess I want to do a follow-up question to do that. Do you think experiences like where, you're not proud of bringing that food, experience of changing your name, or sometimes not doing things that you want to do, you think that's that plays a factor in the person that you're becoming when you were young and the person that you're becoming now?
Absolutely, 100%.
Sorry.
Oh, yeah.
I think it definitely does. Like a lot of that has dictated like how I see myself, and like the whole like I wasn't necessarily like proud of being Indian until like I wouldn't say now I'm proud to be Indian. Like I've definitely come a long way, but like at one point I hated the fact that I was Indian because of that sort of stuff I did. And like multicultural days at school, like the Harmony Day, and we'd always have like the option to like dress up, and I never did ever, except this year was the first time I ever did. I worked with after school, but like yeah. So yeah, but I think that definitely does like have a huge impact on the way like you see yourself and stuff like that.
Absolutely. Actually, Gardner, can I ask a question about something that Swati said earlier about proving your identity? I don't feel like I've ever had to prove my identity in the Australian context in terms of being Australian or being Kiwi or being anything like that. But I do feel like as a Fijian Indian, I've had to prove my Indianness. Because recently I was in a conversation with someone, they're like, oh, where are you from? And I explained my heritage. And they were like, oh, so you're not really Indian. And that really hit me. And I was like, oh, damn. I'm like, no, I definitely am, because I've had a very different experience to what Udit has had, in the sense that I grew up very, very Indian. Like I've grown up in a very Australian suburb, but we were part of a very strong Indian community. And I'm just wondering, has anyone else had that experience? Like, have you had that experience, or has anyone else had that experience where if you've come from so many different places and you've migrated so many different times that you're not seen as what you identify as? Like my cultural identity is Indian.
Yeah, I can say on that, because so my background is actually so my ancestors are from pre-division of India and Pakistan, so they're from the border somewhere between that. But there was a forced migration because it was a British colony, and we were East Africa was a British colony, so there was forced migration of them into Kenya and Uganda for building the railway lines and helping out in engineering works there. But we identify, so I identify as Kenyan, but I'm also identifying as Punjabi, which is from Southeast Asia.
That's your cultural background.
Exactly, but because we're not very sure where in the borderline we're from, and people take up.
But this is so specific, right? You'll be like, I'm Gujarati, or I'm Punjabi, or I'm Fijian Indian, whatever it is. And they're like, oh, so, but where from? And then you have to like pin it down. Like I will always have to be like, okay, ba, kum, like, or like that's where I'm from in Fiji, if I had to go backwards, you know? But same thing, like where in Punjab are you from? You have to be specific to the dot. Like, why are we like this?
But that's a struggle if you have to be specific. And like Udit says, we try and relate to ourselves to it, but we haven't been in it so many, like I've been back to Pakistan because my husband's from Pakistan. So I've been to Pakistan a couple of times, I think 3 or 4 times since I got married. But I can't say I'm from Pakistan because I don't identify as Pakistani.
Exactly.
But when you talk to someone and tell them you're Kenyan, they do wonder, what do you mean you're Kenyan?
Yeah.
You don't look, because you're supposed to look.
You got to look a certain way.
You got to look a certain way, and you don't look like that. So it is a struggle sometimes. And then talking about your background and trying to explain them, sometimes it will take a minute to just get through, who am I?
Yeah, exactly. That question, oh my God, at uni, who are you? Tell me something fun about yourself. I don't know how to tell you. I'm still figuring that out. Like, what do you mean, who am I?
No, thank you so much, and thank you so much for the comments. We're getting plenty of comments and questions. I'm sorry we won't be able to get through everything, but I want to touch on Swati's question, which I think is very important. What role do you think you play in dismantling some of the classism that Tahira touched on? Because while being brown gives us a common label, we are homogeneous. I can't say that word. Sorry, homogeneous. Issues like colorism, casteism, and more play a role in shaping identities relative to us. I might go through Krisha. What do you think of? I guess, yes, we're all deemed as being brown, but again, I think we've talked about and touched on there's so much to us. And I guess, what role do we play as brown people in dismantling some of the differences that we have, the negative differences?
No, this is a really, really interesting question, and thank you for asking me first. Because what I've noticed is like what Anushka was saying, you know, when someone asks you when you're Indian, and then they'll ask me, oh, where are you from? I'll be like, Gujarat. Okay, but like, what part of Gujarat? I'm like, oh, I'm from here. And last thing, it always comes, what caste are you? And I'm like, why does that matter? And I just feel like, you know, the issue of class, the issue of caste is very, very primitive, for the lack of a better term. It's something that has been passed down from generation to generation without an explanation. And being an international student, you know, I've noticed myself asking that question as well sometimes.
Yeah.
Like if there's someone from China, now I know China has different ethnicities and they have a caste system as well. And I ask, okay, so what ethnicity are you? Like, what caste are you from? And then it sort of hit me that, you know, if we're going to expect Western culture to accept us, then we have to be willing to accept that there are differences in us. And that if we cannot be in a different class from white people, then why should brown people have classes within themselves? So I feel like the identity crises that I experienced moving from place to place was sort of like a real good wake-up call to introspect on how I'm internalizing these things as well. You know, I can't be dismantling stereotypes about me if I am not introspecting and dismantling the internalized stereotypes I hold. So I think in terms of just dismantling these things within the brown community starts by acknowledging that they exist. We can't pretend like they're not there, because a lot of the time we behave as if we're colorblind. You know, we don't see color, we don't see caste, but when you're colorblind, you're further erasing the presence of these issues. So first, start by acknowledging it, have it in conversation. And once you acknowledge it is when you realize that just the word caste or whatever caste you're associated with has its own struggle and its own history. And that gives you the opportunity to learn something about it and sort of change the internalized racism that brown people have as well.
Well, I think absolutely very well covered, and there's been a few comments saying fantastic comment, Krishna, and I think what you've added there is bang on, that, you know, we need to work on that system, but before we even work on that, we need to acknowledge that it's there. I think, me personally, I think sometimes we use the word brown to protect ourselves and, you know, be like, yes, we're a big forefront of our community, but also when it comes to our kind, there's a lot of issues that are going on, from colorism to casteism to even the religion plays a factor in our own community.
100%. And the way that we do things differently, I know that we talk about discrimination and racism outside of, like, you know, our community, but can I just highlight and acknowledge the fact that there is a lot of, I don't want to say racism, but there's definitely some discrimination between brown people because of where you come from. And it exists. I'm going to say it does. It's there. And I think the younger generation is getting, and when I say younger, I mean, I don't actually know how young I am anymore because there's a lot more younger people than me. I work in a high school, so I don't feel so young anymore. But
You're young. You're young.
Okay, well, I'll take that. But Auntie, you're young too. But our generation, like this generation that is happening, I feel like I don't want to use the term woke, but to quote the young people, I feel like we're a little bit more woke about these particular situations and these particular issues. And like Krisha said, we are not so much being like, oh, like color doesn't exist. I think we're learning to acknowledge these things bit by bit and sort of break that barrier and, like, I don't know, become genuinely more accepting and more acknowledging of, like, how things work within this own, you know, our own little brown ecosystem. And I think that's just like by participating in other, like, cultural events, like, you know, for example, you guys held Garba earlier this year, right? I came to Garba. I've never done Garba in my life before, but that was fantastic. And the fact that we can live in Australia and that there are such a wide variety of like in terms of ethnicity of brown people, and that you can be involved in all of these different things. I think one of the best ways to, like, dismantle that is to get involved with other parts of, like, brown culture. Do it, go and learn about it, because guess what? You never know what you're missing out on. And I know that there's this big thing as well, and I don't know whether this comes just from being, like, back in India, but here as well, between, like, that South Indian, North Indian, like, and the differences. Like, I was talking to a friend recently, and they were like, sometimes people will post memes and we can't relate to it because, like, you know, like, it's very North Indian based. Like, we don't eat biryani, so it doesn't relate to us. But, like, it's really interesting to see that. It's interesting to see that there's even differences between us, and we can start closing that gap a little bit. But it starts with conversation and conversations like this.
Yeah,
100%. Oh, sorry.
I just want to add to that. I totally agree with Anushka. I think I love the energy and the enthusiasm that the younger people are bringing into these conversations, because looking at my generation, we had issues. We had the same issues, but we didn't have names for the issues. So we did have colorism, for example, but we didn't have a name for it. We were just ashamed when you were darker in the community. You were just shamed, not given a name, but you were also not included in activities or in society. But I'm really happy that the younger generation, they're aware of it, they acknowledge it, and they're trying to work towards it. Our generation is still learning it. We're getting there, but we're not there yet. We have to acknowledge that we still have a lot of concerns in the back of our head about all this intercultural racism that goes on, and we still have a lot of issues in caste systems and society and class, colorism, and we will get there, but just bear with us.
We need a bit of time.
I think that's very well bang on. It shows the difference in generations as well. And I want to add a different perspective to this conversation with Udit. I might have, because you've grown up here, and so I want to ask if have you felt these issues in your day-to-day, and was it where you're aware of this? I want to hear from you.
If I'm going to be honest, no. And I just feel like that's because I'm also not that in touch with the brown community in Australia. Like, I don't have any brown friends. And I don't really spend much time with other brown people. So I feel like I've never actually really ran into any of these things. And to be honest, listening to you guys talk about this stuff is interesting. And it's the first time I'm hearing about a lot of this stuff. So I'm sorry, I can't provide much. You guys have brought so much wisdom to this, but it's been such an enlightening experience for me to listen to this, because I haven't really been exposed to this sort of stuff before.
No, I think what you bring to this conversation is that you haven't had these cultural experiences, and you're adding that, because eventually we come from a very strong cultural background, but then our future generations will come from a very similar background to you, where yes, we're gonna pass on our norms to our kids, but they won't actually grow up in the same culture that we did. So I guess I want to ask you, how do you feel about other people in your age? I know you said you touched on that you don't have many brown friends. I guess I wanted to ask you, have you ever felt the need to explore that side of you, or you haven't explored it as much?
I haven't explored it as much, and I guess that's just because as I said before, I've become so accustomed to being an Australian and having those experiences that I haven't felt the need to explore this side of who I am. And I guess my parents never I guess they never really forced that on me either.
No, I think that's very well touched on. I think Mahek and Swati have both said that your experience is not unique, and I think it's needed in this conversation. So thank you so much for providing. And I guess that's what I want to touch on. We have different ages, different experiences, and it's cool to see you guys all, get into a conversation and talk about these issues. We have more comments. We have plenty of questions, by the way. Thank you so much for everyone that's tuned in. It's been wonderful so far. Hopefully you guys have gotten so much out of it. Priyanka, just come before what Krisha was saying. I want to throw a question. I think there was here before. Sorry, I might bring it up.
While you're looking for that, can I just comment that I'm actually, Udit, I'm really happy about your experiences. I just want to say how happy I am that your parents have actually created that space for you, that support system, that you're not confined to, to have brown friends only, or to be in a certain society, or certain community only. So you're exposed, and they've given you that opportunity to do that. So good on you.
Yeah. Absolutely. Can I just add to that as well? I think I've always said biculturalism is a beautiful thing. And one of the things about living between two very different cultural systems. So the Australian culture is very individualistic. South Asian culture is very collectivistic, in which, everything we tend to do is surrounded by our family and connected to our family, career, partner, education, whatever we do in our lives tends to come back as a family decision, as opposed to, I think Australian culture is very much based on the self. And I think when you're growing up between two different cultures, and if you have the support of parents who are quite balanced in the sense of like, we're going to provide you with some values and we're going to like push you to maybe achieve and like the values that are really important, but also we want you to experience the other side of things because we have moved to a different country and there is a shift and a difference in the value system, that really supports with striking a balance between your two cultures. And I think that's really important for mental health, because what I'm seeing right now in both private practice and when I work in a very diverse school, is that when you don't strike that balance, it causes a lot of anxiety and it causes depression and it can cause a lot of stress in the long run. And coming back to the topic of what we're talking about as well, it causes a lot of issues around cultural identity and I like self-identity and then self-esteem. And then those building the relationships, and then it's just like a knock-on effect. So to all of the parents out there who are helping to strike that balance for their bicultural kids, because it's hard to move here. Let's just acknowledge that. For international students, for like migrant parents, for anyone who is coming here to build a life, it is difficult. You are assimilating, you're acculturating, you're trying to like work everything out yourself, but then to be able to do that for your children is fantastic. Like, honestly.
Yeah, perfect. I think that's a very well made point, that the mental health side effects can be quite big, especially growing up in two different cultures, not understanding things that are going on and being almost forced to, I guess, hide certain parts of your identity. Like if you're at home, you can do this. If you're outside, you can't do that.
You can't do that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think sometimes that does lead to
and the unspoken rules as well, you know, of like the unspoken rules of our culture versus the unspoken rules of a different culture. It's hard to explain to some of your friends, for example, when you're growing up here, why you do things a certain way. Like, why do you, when I was turning 18, some of my friends were like, why do you still need to ask your parents when you leave the house? I'm like, dude, like I'm 26 now. I mean, and I've just moved out. Like I still tell my parents where I am. Like, what are you talking about?
There's so many taboo topics in
so many taboo topics
people need to start talking about, and mental health is one of them.
Mental health is a big one.
It's such a big one that we need to start talking. Kanu, you should do another one on mental health in the brown community, because that's such a big topic, and we need to start talking about that. And yes, the values we've been instilled into us. You know, you have
and
to
the precious of those values as well.
Every time you want to do something, or ask permission before you do stuff. It's just, I think there's a lack of communication. That's all that's missing.
That's all that's happening. That's what I see. And by the time I finish with some of my clients being like, your parents are looking at things like this, you're looking at things like this. When you look at it like this, they're like, oh, right. Like, so it's just a lot of miscommunication intergenerationally, and that can cause a lot of conflict.
Yeah, it is. Because from the parents' point of view, it's more like being protective, trying to protect the kid. But that's not what it's perceived when it goes out to the Australian society. It's like, no, they're not protecting you. They're actually controlling you. They're
exactly.
Yeah, so it's the way.
I think.
Perception.
100%. I might throw to Krisha now. I guess since you grew up in Malawi, but your heritage is from India, and having those, what was your parents' experience? Because they grew up in Malawi, which is very different to India. Than you grew up in Malawi, and do you still have those? Do you feel like you were imposed those Indian values, or were you encouraged to follow them on?
I definitely do think that I grew up with a lot of Indian sort of values at home. But the good, and like initially I did feel like, I have to adhere to this at home, but then outside I have to be different. But then when I sort of moved to Australia, I feel like my parents also relaxed, which I'm really thankful for. And like Anushka said, to the parents out there, like, you go let your children go out and have these experiences themselves. Because when they let me go and when I went out and had those experiences is when I actually experienced myself returning to those values, coming back to home, asking mom, how do you make this? I miss it. I miss dal chawal. And that's because it's only after I was exposed to those experiences did I really understand the true value of what my parents were trying to give me. I do feel like there are practices in our home culture that are obsolete. And that's because the time our parents migrated in is very different from the time I'm migrating in.
Yeah.
And so for my parents, while they think they are protecting me, it may just be hindering my progress in the future.
Yeah.
So I definitely think that it's really nice for me to have had that home culture because it formed the foundations of my values. You know, I grew up respecting people. I grew up acknowledging authority. I grew up acknowledging that we have all these cultures and traditions and I can celebrate them. But then it was also sort of nice to grow up and realize that I don't need to always have that with me. And what I will face in my time will be different from what my parents faced in their time. So even if my parents are going off at me about like, oh, why didn't you tell us where you went? I take it with a grain of salt because sometimes, you know, they don't know what's best for you, but sometimes you don't either. So I have absolutely mad respect for my parents, and also, you know, Taraji, I can't imagine what it's like for you as adults to have, you know, lived some of your adult life in your home country and then migrating to restart your life. Because at a certain age, you will be on the point of adapting. You'll be on the point of changing yourself, which is when I noticed there's a lot of resistance in cultures, and I feel like that resistance in adapting to culture is what sort of perpetuates that toxic mentality to be passed from one generation to the other. I feel like the harsher side of my culture that I experienced was because that part of my culture was resistant to the change that I was being introduced to.
I feel like just to add on to that, what Krishna's just mentioned, I think what's happened, or I feel like what's happening, first of all, thanks Krishna for sharing that, because what I heard from that is let them go and they'll come back. Let them go, they'll come back. And the other thing I heard from that was conversations. So important to have those conversations to raise awareness. But the thing I wanted to mention was there's need for communication. There's need for the older generation to understand that we are putting a lot of pressure on our younger generation to form a certain identity that we have in our minds. But we need to understand that the pressure on them is to have those dual identities, you know, one that they try and create when they're outside away from us, and one they have when they're in front of us. We don't need them to do that. They don't need to have those two identities. We just need to create a space for them to have one identity that they're proud of and that they feel comfortable with. And the only way we can do that is have more open conversations and understanding. There's nothing wrong in that.
Oh my God, can we preach that louder? Sorry, I was going to say, can we just preach that louder and louder for everyone that is out there? Because honest to God, this is the mentality that I think is so important. My parents have adopted this with us, my brother and I just think it has made life so much easier to be able to be the same person that I am at home, that I am out. As I was growing up, it was a little bit more difficult in terms of trying to like figure out your identity as one does. But as an adult, I'm like, no, whoever I am at home is exactly who I am out in the world. And it is because they allowed us to strike that balance between, like, again, like what it was talking about, my brother's very different to me. He's not as into like the culture and stuff. But our parents never forced stuff onto us. And I really appreciate that, because they were like, go out, be who you want to be. But just like Krisha was saying, you were instilled with those values, those collectivistic values from your South Asian background. And that has been so helpful, because things like being able to connect with people, being able to network with other people, being able to pay that respect and, you know, like communication, all of these things have been really helpful. But on the flip side of that, like, you know, being out in the community and like adapting those Australian values has been really helpful as well, because it's helped me to become more independent and to think in like a different way. And so like, I think we can really draw from both of the cultures that we're exposed to, or the many cultures we're exposed to if you've been migrating multiple times. And that can really help to shape who you are.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. And I think it's so good to have these conversations. I'm personally learning a lot from this conversation. And I feel like I'm just listening into you guys talking. I want to go to Udit. I guess I want to touch on you if you've had a similar experience of having to pick and choose between two identities, or because I know you're still figuring that out, and this year was the first year that you wore your cultural attire to school. So I guess where do you see yourself like going from your like finding your cultural identity?
I mean, so like with the whole like switching and dual identity thing, I don't think that's ever been an issue for me. Like, I mean, I've like you guys have all said that you have had to like come home and be different, but like for me, if I've always been the same, like I'm the same person I'm at home that I am with my friends. Like obviously, like slightly different, but like I've never felt like I've had to be different. But like in terms of like in the future, I think like I'm definitely like hoping I can sort of fall into my like South Asian background a little bit more and like learn more about my culture. And like at school I'm actually doing like a monologue for theatre studies, and I'm doing a recontextualization of Shakespeare in 16th century India with like so like I feel like I'm definitely like sort of falling into that a little bit more, and I'm excited to see where it sort of takes me. But yeah.
No, perfectly said. And thank you so much again, for bringing your rawness to this conversation. I think that rawness, sort of authenticity of that. Some of these concepts might be for the first time you're even hearing this, or thinking, oh, was I like that when I'm in school now? Am I like that? So yeah, thank you so much for bringing your rawness. I think it's very valuable to this conversation.
No, thank you for having me here. Yeah.
Perfect. We might go to some comments because I know there's a lot, so we might just go one response each. Should parents teach or ask their children to only follow the culture of the country they live in? So I think this is a perfect question for Tahira. What do you think of that?
I don't think any child or I don't think children should be forced to follow a culture. I think if you educate the children or give them the values that you feel will be beneficial to them with an explanation of why you're doing it, whatever it is that you want them to do, I think you should allow them to create their own culture, adding on to the values that you've put onto them. So there's no need to force anyone to follow a certain culture or follow a certain country or community. But if you've given them an explanation behind what you're teaching them, leave it up to them.
Very well put. Thank you so much. We might go to Oz's question. What are your thoughts on culture appropriation? The popularity of yoga, turmeric, should we call it out or should it be celebrated? I'm guessing this is not from, I guess, people who aren't brown or from their background. Anyone want to take that one?
Yes. Can I put a comment on this? Either or. Okay. As much as it pains me to see turmeric lattes being sold for $4.50, which is a haldi doodh. Everyone, you just anyway. The whole thing stresses me out. $4.50 for haldi doodh. Anyway, but from personally speaking, I think I don't know about calling out or celebrated, but I think something that should happen is maybe some education. So when people, for example, at work talk about yoga or even within like my friendship circle, when we talk about yoga, I'm like, oh, well, actually, did you know that like the yoga that we do here, like in Australia, like the physical form is actually only one part of yoga. And then we go into the details of like the different parts of it. So if you're able to sort of educate yourself about topics and then explain it to other people, I think that sort of shows a little bit more growth. It's not hindering people from, or stopping anyone from engaging in something. But it's also being like, here's actually why we do it. Or like, turmeric lattes, that's cool that you love them, dude. But here is why we do it back at home. And this is actually, you can do it for a lot cheaper if you just go and buy some turmeric. Like, don't spend the money. But do you know what I mean? Like actually going through and providing the education around that is I think it's so much more of a nicer way of going about it rather than calling it out and being like, no, that's terrible. You're not supposed to do that. Or just going along and celebrating it. We've got the knowledge who better than us? We are the experts in our own culture sometimes. We are the experts in ourselves. So we can provide that information to others.
No, I think that's perfect, Stump Up. I think we should add the context to the things that we do or the things that our culture does rather than just letting someone else who doesn't understand it, do something about it. We might go to Sneha's question. What are some other ways we can better support brown folks navigating their identity when they might be feeling a lot of pressure appropriating Black culture as well? I think I might go to Udit if you feel comfortable. I guess sometimes we get put in this bubble of, oh, you're the other community, you fit into this other scope. And I guess now I think we've touched on, I think Manan's touched in the comments that brown communities really come to the forefront in recent years, where we're quite prominent in Australian culture. I guess, what was your experience with it?
Wait, sorry, what was the question again?
I think it was, how do you, there we go. What are some other ways we can better support brown folks navigating your identity and not being confused with the black culture or being put into one box?
I mean, look, I don't know what we can do about it, but like, I just feel like knowing that it's okay. And I guess like from this conversation alone, you can see that like, that it's such a diverse community that, you know, like, even though it's the brown community, that it's so diverse, and that like, no one's ever going to fit, like there's not one mold that you can fit. That's why like it's just it's okay to like just, you know, be yourself, and if you're different, and that's fine. Like, you know, you don't have to like try and strive to fit like a certain stereotype or, you know, a certain like perception, because, you know, you are who you are. And I guess just knowing that and like instilling that is like probably the way to go, you know.
No, perfectly summed up. I think taking ownership of, yes, I am brown. What are you going to do about it? Don't put me in another box. Perfect. We might go to a few more questions. So he just said she had to shorten name to Sal. No one can pronounce my name. It's pronounced Saleha. There we go. I think we talked about LinkedIn having that option. Rao Joss has said, wonderful discussion, and on point 2, my name has 3 syllables and I've changed it to 1. I think, yeah, what we have said before, really resonating with a lot of people around the name, the identity, hiding things about our culture, and, you know, changing it to be more Western. If that's the word I've used. Is there any more questions? There you go. The Mehek. Do you have experience of the influence of class, religion, and gender sections on cultural identity? So I think we might go to Krisha. I think, do you think your identity has been influenced by the class, the religion, and even the countries that you grew up in and are living in currently?
I think the easiest answer to that question is yes. It's almost impossible for us to, you know, encounter something new or something from home and not have it assimilate into a part of our culture, into our identity. It's going to affect us in one way or the other. Positive, negative, you might accept it, you might reject it, you might have trouble dealing with it. That being said, I also think that there is nothing more beautiful than a person that is an amalgamation of different cultures, different religions, because the plethora of knowledge and lived experiences we have is absolutely incomparable compared to like a monolingual or a monoreligious culture. We as humans, you know, are social creatures, and if we are able to interact with all of these religions and cultures in a way that we're taking the good from it and passing it on or sort of spreading it, then I feel like it would be much easier for us to, you know, define our cultural identity. In reality, it's not that simple. Like, you know, one of the questions that came up about how do you feel about, you know, brown folk who feel pressurized to sort of appropriate Black culture. And I had a friend like that, and I just asked them, why? Why do you think that's necessary?
Yeah.
And we sort of unpacked the conversation to realize it's cool. You know, it was a trend right now. It was validation. And so it's very natural for our sort of what we display as cultural identity to be influenced by how other people are reacting to it. And so I definitely think that all of these things form a part of us, because at the end of the day, we wear our cultural identity externally. And if it's not receiving that recognition from the outside world, we are going to try and erase it or remodel it as much as possible. But I feel like we need to give ourselves more credit and realize that the reason why we have these beautiful fundamental values, you know, respect, love, acceptance, is because we've experienced those things. So go out there and like immerse yourself in as many uncomfortable things as possible, because something good will come out of it.
Very well summed up. And I think the way you speak is beautiful. And I think what you've said is, I think it's resonated with a lot of people, I guess the people on this call and in the comments. Thank you so much. And I guess just being conscious of time, we might thank you so much again for everyone for tuning in and for your comments and questions. It's been wonderful. I feel like we need to do a part 2. It would be amazing because I think these conversations can go on forever. And I think this is the starting of having these intersectional of ages, generations, experience conversations, because I think a lot of us have learnt a lot of different things about us and even just brown folk. So I want to finish off by saying just one question. What would you say to other brown people or other people from different cultures who might be watching this about how they should explore their identity, or if they're not, I guess, comfortable with it, how should they become comfortable with it? And we might just go one response. Yep, you can go for it.
Okay, I'm going to take a real mental health approach from this, and I'm going to take a real psyche sort of answer, and I might plug myself a little bit, but I am this is the entire reason that I started Umeed Psychology, everyone. My practice is based on supporting Asian Australians. I've done research in this area around values and culture and cultural identity. So if you are struggling with this and to the point where it's like affecting your identity and then affecting mental health, in terms of like anxiety, a little bit of stress, not sure where you're going with life, this is actually something that I support a lot of my clients with, and I'm happy to like work through things like values, working through acceptance, working through commitment, working through who are you and what is your reason for being. I'm very, very, like, I just think that is so important. Or even just like go follow my page. I talk about this a lot. And this is not because not because I want more to have more people coming into business or anything like that, but it's just, I found it so valuable with the clients that I've been dealing with, because it's been some who, it's been such a variety, like some people who have grown up with such a strong culture and then have been impacted by the pressures of that, or some who have grown up with like little to no culture at all and then being like, okay, well, now I want to find myself. Where do I strike that balance? And some that are really struggling with that internalized racism. And I just find that even sitting down with someone to go through that and discuss it and unpack it and really discover who you are, just, it changes everything else about you. And I think one of the main points that we've talked about today, and Krish has mentioned it a lot, is external validation. But why are we not, like, how do we move away from external validation if we don't start internally validating who we are? And how do we do that if we don't start somewhere to figure out, you know, who we are and where we're coming from?
Perfectly said. Thank you so much for adding that expert side of it. And I think we're getting feedback comments of saying thank you so much. Anyone else like to add on to that? What would you say to other brown folk?
I would like to add to that. I'd first like to say this to the brown communities: be proud of yourself. Be very proud of what you have and what you bring to the community, because you do have a lot to offer. You've got so much wealth because of the different communities or different cultures that you've got in you, which not many people can be proudly say that I'm actually a multicultural human being in myself, which we are. But apart from that, be open to having those difficult conversations. And the reason, so my daughter Mehek and myself, we started this podcast where we're having these difficult conversations, where we just talk about issues that are current in this community. And the reason we're doing this is because the podcast it's called Chit Chat and Chai with Amma. So Amma meaning mother in Hindi. The reason we're doing it is because we want people to know that it's okay to sit with your children and have those difficult conversations. There's nothing wrong in it. It doesn't show disrespect. It doesn't devalue you. It doesn't take away your power or control over your children. It just creates that, it breaks down those barriers and creates a safe space for your children to be able to tell you or speak to you. And we need to do that. We need to break those barriers. So please have a conversation with your children over dinner table or over a cup of tea. Be proud of it.
Thank you so much. 100%. And Faze, you said an incredible panel, so I get to learn from you all. And we might throw this to Udit. I guess, I think some of these topics might be for the first time you're hearing this. What's something that you would like to take from this and I guess offer to other young people around your age? What do you think they should do?
I mean, the whole idea of like having those open conversations, because I guess, probably this is like one of the first like open conversations I've had about this sorts of things. And it's probably the first time I'm hearing about a lot of these things. So I feel like something I definitely took away from this is to be able to go and have that open conversation like this one that I'm having today. And like encourage people to like do that, even people who aren't in the brown community, and to, like, you know, even if to, like, learn in their own community, or if they want to learn more about, you know, me and my culture and who I am, then to have those open and honest conversations and ask questions.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Very well put together. Danielle Reed just put in, thank you for sharing and being so open about your experiences. Really eye-opening. It's really good to see people from, I guess, other communities being present here today.
Yeah.
We might go to Krisha, I guess. What would you like to add to that? What would you say to other young people or people, other brown folk?
Yeah. What I'm noticing with my generation is that everyone wants to do what's in. That's cool. And something I tell everyone my age is being different is difficult. And it's something that, you know, you sort of have to acknowledge that, okay, you know, if I'm going to sort of manifest my identity, my culture as much as I want to, I am going to handle a lot of, you know, backlash, criticism, you're not doing this right, from someone from my culture, but then from someone from like a Western culture saying, oh, that's not okay. So I would definitely encourage everyone my age to sort of realize that what you sort of hate about your culture, someday it could be the most popular thing going around. Like, who would have thought that Hollywood would be one of the most popular countries in Australia? You know, and it's so common for, you know, culture evolves, and the more globalization occurs, the more, you know, one culture influencing other is going to be common. So I think it's sort of important to realize that culture is a very surface thing, but then the values that we all share are like universal. So something you hate in your culture could be expressed in a different culture in a different way, but they essentially stand the same thing. So it's definitely really cool to be different, is what I tell my friends.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Very well put together. Michelle, as you said, it was absolutely phenomenal to watch tonight. Thank you for sharing what it means to have a brown identity. And I want to take this opportunity to thank all the guests, Tahira, Udit, Anushka, and Krisha for coming on for an hour. We scheduled for an hour, but all of your comments and your questions have been wonderful. We had to go a bit over time. And I feel like these are conversations that we need to be having more and more. And I think it's cool to see all of you bring forward your different experiences. I just want to say thank you so much for, and I want to acknowledge that you all have very different lived experiences, and it was great to see you bring that to this conversation. And even at the same, if you don't know something, you just say, oh, I personally haven't felt this, or this is the first time I'm hearing this. So I think it's very powerful, the things that you've all said and shared with us. And I think, as a comment said, everyone's been loving it. So thank you so much. And if you're watching this from home or wherever, thank you so much for watching and asking your questions and commenting. It's really made this an amazing hour and a half. And I hope you continue to explore your identity, to explore who you are, and be proud of, you know, being different. It is difficult, as Krisha said, but it is something that we should all be proud of. Thank you so much, and we hope to see you soon.